So, Dr. Spiegel, thank you so much for joining me on the You're Not Alone podcast today. I'm super excited to have you on. And we were talking back and forth a little bit before I hit record on the episode today. And I think the topic that we stumbled across is a topic worth discussing, because not only, if we think about it specifically with OCD, not only does cancel culture really affect the overall well-being, the mental health, the anxiety levels, the ruminations, the obsessions, the concerns inside of the OCD community, but I think at a larger level, cancel culture is something that it's not, to a certain extent, we were talking about, we understand why it can be used as a valuable tool to quote unquote maybe rid out some bad apples, but generally speaking, it can be a little bit unhealthy. And I think you, having been in this space long enough, you're a doctor, you're a clinical psychologist. Can you give your perspective through the lens of a clinical psychologist as to your thoughts about cancel culture?
Sure. And I would say cancel culture, largely speaking, is inherently problematic. I think it is something that has become, unfortunately, in the U.S., a major societal issue, where it's saying that certain thoughts, certain perspectives, certain ideas are bad and they're unacceptable, and that if you have those views, well, your views are unacceptable and you should be canceled. And that means that we're going to come after your work. Right. And until you agree with, I'm going to say the mob, I know it's an expression that's often used as like the Twitter mob. But unless if you agree with us, you're out. And even if you agree with us, it's still not going to be enough. And that's a real bad perspective. It doesn't allow people to express themselves, to feel like safe and feel comfortable. And not only that, even things that could potentially you have said as a teenager, been used against you, where you could find yourself out of work. And so, us talking about this, I think it's so great, Zach, that you're bringing this up, because this is something that's not just affecting those with OCD, not affecting those with anxiety. It's causing real stress for society as a whole, because people don't feel safe. They don't feel like they can freely express themselves. So I'm glad to hear you bringing this up. And, I'm happy to address further some ideas that I have, even within the OCD and anxiety community with respect to it.
Can you share some of those ideas? I'm curious to hear a little bit about how we start to tackle this challenge.
And I will even tell you, as a psychologist, it's true for me as well. Like, I'm mindful of how I speak. And that, to some extent, I think we need to be selective, just because we live in the wonderful US of A, where we can share ideas and there's that freedom of speech. At the same time, we still have to be mindful of what we say. So, I think very clearly people should never say like openly hurtful and, racist comments and so forth. At the same time, while mentioning that this is a clear societal issue, something that is impacting everyone, I think that's important for the OCD community to know, that this is an issue for everyone.
Right.
And I'd say people have to live the lives that they're going to live. So you should still try the best you can to express yourself, even if it brings discomfort and so forth. A big part of OCD treatment, a big part of anxiety treatment is embracing uncertainty. So sharing a different perspective. And maybe that means that not everyone will be okay with that. And that's okay. That's part of your growth. That's learning to handle that discomfort. There is no 100% guarantee you won't be canceled. However, if you're living your life based on fear, if you're avoiding certain things, if you're not engaging in the life you want to live, then honestly, the great tragedy is actually cancel culture is winning even more so. So it's really important to kind of find that balance where you're pushing yourself in that discomfort.
Yeah, I agree with that. I had a wonderful guest on last week, Sean Flores. He is a man of color from the UK. He lives with OCD, and him and I talked about like intrusive racist thoughts, that some like racism OCD, and it was really, really awesome to get his perspective. He's actually friends with another woman named Africa Brooke, who she's another woman of color from the UK who started to study and then come out with content on social media right around the time of the George Floyd movement, because she was finding, first and foremost, she found in herself this deep anger and this like desire to almost like the public square hanging or the guillotine. Like when that happened, it was a complete and total tragedy. I don't think anybody who watched that video would think any differently. Now, again, don't want to trigger anybody. If you have intrusive thoughts where you think about that and that happens, to Dr. Spiegel's point, there's a process to address that. But I think the humanity inside of the majority of us was like, oh, wow, that's really graphic to watch. And so she talked about that, this visceral reaction to want to get revenge. And what she realized and what Sean and I talked about in this episode that's going to be coming out in the next couple of weeks was that I think that there's this deep wound in society right now. And there are people that feel that they've been left out. They're frustrated. They're hurt. They've gone through some sort of trauma or some sort of challenge in their life, and they're looking consciously or subconsciously to go out and sort of relieve that frustration by being able to cancel somebody out. There's something, I think, cathartic for a lot of people when they can go out and cancel somebody else and stick it to them. And if the idea, for example, is that, I think you and I can both agree, racism is something that is a tragedy in our human existence, and it's something that we want to actively get rid of. And I agree with that. The question, and this is what Sean and I talked about, the question becomes, by what means? And are we really trying to take people by the hand, let's say a person who is actually racist, and change their perspective and get them to understand, like, this is shared humanity. We're all in this together. And his point was that Africa Brooke talked about turning inwards and realizing that so much of her anger in the movement, in the Black Lives Matter movement, was her own frustration and anger. And once she started to process through that, she felt compelled to start reading and then going on social media to share a more compassionate alternative to cancel culture. And I've been following her for a while and consume her content, and I just found it to be such a breath of fresh air because she allows for space in that area of gray, and she allows for there to be nuance. And you're a clinical psychologist that treats OCD. We have, like, my world is living in areas of gray. So what are your thoughts on that? How do people begin to start to lead with compassion, and how do we stop thought policing and start walking in maybe a more compassionate path?
I think what was so great about that example that you just gave was she came from a place of self-compassion and understanding her perspective. It did not mean that, her perspective and her frustration with societal ills and, how she's seen, African Americans being mistreated, where she's coming from was very, very real. And though by communicating the way she did, she was leaving open a perspective to have dialogue and really actually making effective change versus unnecessarily using scare tactics that from a long-term perspective are unhelpful. So from herself, she's got greater clarity on where she's coming from. She's more able to impact the perspective of others. And from a societal standpoint, there's going to be more of an openness because there's less of it's not being done through fear-based tactics.
You know, based on what you said with the fear-based tactics, do you think that a big driver of cancel culture is that media knows a part of their business model is that they know that fear sells and that is how they're going to get viewership and get people to pay attention and get people to tune in and get them riled up? I mean, is that basically the playbook and kind of why we've gotten to this place here? Or what are your thoughts?
I think it's obvious from social media. Where someone will maybe not have the same perspective or not come from the same background. And again, that's not to belittle the people who are coming from whatever backgrounds that they have, but suddenly because they're an out group, they immediately are in the wrong. They immediately should not have a perspective. These things are not helpful when dialogue is done that way. So I think from a social media perspective, then the problem is someone will make a post and, you know, everyone's afraid of saying something that could be misconstrued. And there's the like buttons, and lo and behold, what gets reinforced is that kind of that intense emotion, sometimes anger. And what I would say gets invalidated is open communication, because people are here to learn. They don't want to, though, feel that they did some incredible wrongdoing by just expressing curiosity. I mean, I know it's interesting. It's because I know we're talking about it more from a societal issue, which is very important. And because I think about it, when you have that perspective, well, this is not just something that's just impacting those with OCD. This is something that needs to change. I am hopeful it will change. It's seeming like a major wound where it's easy to kind of have that perspective of going to the uncertainty pace that, you know, people with OCD have. It's sometimes hard to see, hey, how is this going to turn out in, 10 years from now, 5 years from now, even 2 years from now. And we don't really know what direction it'll hold. It doesn't mean, though, that we as a society should continue on the social media frenzy. And yes, it goes beyond social media. Some of these news sites, they are very quick to point out wrongdoings. I'm hesitant on calling out specific news sites on your podcast, but it's something that happens on both sides of the political aisle, and it's a problem.
I think people can guess which big media outlets we're talking about on both sides of the political aisle. They've got a playbook. They got a playbook, Dr. Spiegel, and they're running it. And it's for their profit at the expense of the people. And it's a bummer in a lot of ways. But I think that's why these conversations are so important, because both you and I, and I'm going to give Sean a big shout out. I'm no longer scared to ask these questions because of my conversation with Sean. I know that there are people out there that look like Sean that, I guess, and I'm saying look like Sean because right now it feels like we've mostly talked about like racism and that impact on culture, and then how that also impacts the OCD community. And Sean lives with OCD, and he had a wonderful perspective on it. But Sean, I really just, I love the guy because he's so, he is open and he's curious, just like what you touched on. And he gave me permission to not be scared to like, just bring up the question, like, is cancel culture healthy? Like, is there another way that we could be going about this? Because I mean, the other one that I saw really impact people was the last couple of years, obviously with COVID, and people with OCD, especially. I feel like there were a lot of individuals in the OCD community that really, really struggled during the COVID era. And I'm sure as a clinician, you must have seen that firsthand. Did you see a big uptick in patients? And people struggling?
You know, it's fascinating that you bring this up, because I'd say there was two perspectives. There are people who I worked with beforehand who had been treated, who had their OCD treated beforehand. And when COVID came up, they were totally ready to go. And part of the big thing is because those, and Zach, you can, I'm sure, really attest to it, a major, major component of treatment where you really get better beyond just the exposure work is really embracing uncertainty. Yes, life is unpredictable. Perhaps some of these contamination concerns could come true. You know, perhaps some of these harm-related obsessions could come true. And I'm going to live the life that I'm going to live. And I'm willing to embrace that uncertainty. So for those that had really kind of jumped that work ahead of time, now all of a sudden you've got the pandemic. They were better equipped than than people without OCD. I mean, really equipped. And it was, obviously I'm generalizing here, but it was very fascinating to see. And I was seeing this in a lot of cases. I would say conversely, those who have had kind of OCD that was untreated for a variety of reasons, whether it was, inappropriate clinical care, just not the best clinical care. I mean, something like OCD is often untreated, not the right treatment. I think IOCDF says for 14 to 17 years based on research. And so it's a significant amount of time. So, in those cases, now suddenly you did have a pandemic. And if, they had OCD that was manageable, or even if it wasn't so manageable, they were going on, or even if people had, let's say, subclinical symptoms. So they did have some compulsive behaviors. They did have some obsessive obsessions. And now all of a sudden you had the pandemic, this major global related issue. Then it was really, really difficult because the uncertainty levels were going up so high. And not only that, you were having the rest of society play into their biggest fears by, saying, oh, if you do this, you're going to die. I mean, I remember in the very beginning, people were talking about like sanitizing, their plastic bags in the boxes where the pasta is. And not necessarily saying that could be actually very unhealthy, but, people's fears were very high. So if you're thinking about that, people without OCD were having this, we'll now take, people with OCD, if they had contamination concerns, it was very high. And even if they didn't have contamination concerns, the triggering event of OCD could have impacted whatever subtype they had of OCD, whether it was harm-related obsessions, whether it was just right, whether it was pedophilia obsessions, just because you had this massive, massive triggering event, which caused a lot of anxiety. And lo and behold, it's impacting their specific mental health issue.
That is so well said. And Dr. McInvale, we talked about that too. And excuse me, she kind of echoed exactly what you said, which was that people who had been diagnosed prior to the pandemic and had done the work and understood embracing uncertainty, in a lot of cases did a lot better than just like the everyday person. And it was almost like at scale, we sort of saw people doing OCD-like compulsions, cleaning, sanitizing their bags, wearing gloves everywhere. And again, contamination, OCD being one subtype, one small part of the OCD continuum for those listening, because we gotta smash that stigma too, Dr. Spiegel. It's not just hand washing,
Absolutely.
right? But yeah, that is such an interesting point that you bring up. Is there anything?
And I would say also that struggle with uncertainty is still very much there. And I don't think this is limited to people with OCD, but so Zach, I know you live in Orange County and I live in Los Angeles, but I can tell you, and maybe it's also from political perspectives, which is, we're not, I think we should probably not go to, but, going outside and suddenly, you see people in this very open space outside and they have 2 N95 masks on. And
Yeah.
again, is that taking it significantly way above and beyond? Yes, I could say with certainty. And so I think, there's this inherent struggle that people are having, that this pandemic really just threw everyone off. And part of, people's progress, is rolling with uncertainty. You get in your car, that is such like an inherent risk where you could have a car accident, yet you take that on, that uncertainty that comes with it. Now, obviously, if the car accident, if you were going to get in a car and someone would be like, there's about a 1 out of 10 chance that you're going to get in a car accident and die, that's a risk not worth taking, but that's also not based in reality.
That is such a good example. And I love the getting in a car example. That was actually one of the first examples I got when I was experiencing the onset of OCD symptoms from my therapist. So thank you for sharing that. It seems like, and there were different, we won't get into the politics, but it was different personalities between LA County and Orange County. It was two different vibes. One of my best friends lives in LA, and whenever I would go up there, there was like a palpable fear and kind of like a fall in line or you're the other type feeling. And I know that people in LA County were kind of like pissed off at people in Orange County, and people in Orange County sort of felt the same way towards people in LA County. Which, I mean, at the end of the day, I think what you're trying to talk about is the fear that controlled people, that was driven by that uncertainty. And I guess the point that you're trying to make is that at a certain point, you have to take that, you have to live your life and take that risk, right? I mean, because the probabilities, statistically, like with the car example, are just so much lower. And how much of your life do you want to spend living in fear? Is that kind of the messaging that you're giving off?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, what I would say is, obviously if someone has a significant medical issue, and we're talking about earlier in the pandemic, that's a completely different perspective.
Right.
But like, even if you took, for instance, two parents and they're wearing an N95 mask, they're having their kid wearing an N95 mask outside, and there's like not really many people on, what message is that also communicating to your child too? So not only for yourself of like the struggles of living with uncertainty, it's also communicating to your child, everything is very scary outside and you can't handle it. And there's who knows, and it's so scary. Again, we're talking about right now. I'm not talking about in the first month of the pandemic, first few months when, CDC was giving us very clear guidelines. At this point, it's a completely different message.
Right.
And if going about that front, it's not helpful. It's not helpful for your kids. It's not helpful for their overall development. It's not helpful for yourself too.
Can I ask you something as a clinical psychologist? How much does identity play into this though? Like did it start to become, I mean, people talk about identity politics all the time. That's a buzzword floating around. At a certain point, did the pandemic go from science-based to this is a part of my identity now, and I want to show others that I am not other, I am with? Did it switch at some point? I mean, what's your perspective on that?
Identity politics is very problematic because essentially you're grossly subscribing to a certain political ideology and not just wondering like, hey, let me think about this from like a more nuanced perspective. So yeah, I would say identity politics, like in the sense of not wanting to be associated somehow. If you didn't wear a mask, you were being associated as being this right-wing extremist. And again, I'm talking about, I want to be mindful of like when we were talking about in the pandemic.
Timelines.
But
timelines
are
totally
very important.
Totally.
But that's when it starts becoming an inherent issue, because it's important to question. It's important to have dialogue and so forth, which is really kind of what we were getting at earlier. And once when you can get that, once when you have that, that's what's helpful. Questioning is important. Living your life in fear, whether it's behaviors that you're doing, or including even kind of what you're avoiding. Like, hey, I'm not going to say anything, and I'm not going to say a perspective that maybe goes outside of a democratic thought process. That's not helpful too.
So Sean brought up an interesting point on the podcast too. He thinks that there's been this huge influx of people into activist type movements to quell their own anxiety so that they feel safe and secure. Almost like, if I'm for Black Lives Matter movement, if I'm for the trans movement, if I'm for masks and vaccines, if I'm for mental health too, and that's a movement as well. If I'm for mental health and getting more people to take care of their brains, if I'm for some of these various movements that we've really seen ramp up over the last couple of years, I will be safe. I will be insulated inside of a group, and I will not therefore be canceled. And Sean, again, a man of color from the UK, where they have issues unique to that country. I mean, we have our unique issues. There's definitely some overlap, where he said he does feel that there is this influx of people that are really anxious. They're, in a lot of ways, he's, maybe not as secure in themselves, as confident, maybe as comfortable being curious or having dialogue. And for them, it's just safer and easier to get behind a movement where, if they question things, right, they could be the focal point of a cancel. But instead, if they fall in line inside of the group, they're safe. So I thought that was a really interesting point, that, wow, could there be, from a psychological standpoint, there's more anxiety permeating throughout society. And so people unknowingly or knowingly fall into these different groups. And again, not saying that there's anything wrong with any of these movements. I mean, I think you and I can both agree, I would love to get rid of racism. I want all people to feel welcome on this planet. I want people to be able to express themselves in their truest form. But what is the why behind somebody's passion for getting behind one of these movements, I think becomes an interesting point that Sean brought up.
Yeah, feeling a sense of belonging, being part of a community, it's very helpful. It's really good. That is a very important perspective, and I think that's what some of these organizations can, in theory, do. I think when in general, I'm Jewish, and being part of a synagogue, being part of people similar with me, people, I also have a strong connection to Israel, being with people who have that similar perspective, that shared sense of identity. That's right. Very helpful. I think broadly what you're speaking to, though, is, hey, if my behavior and me wanting to participate is out of fear or out of anger, that's when it can become problematic. Or, that's an inherent issue. So when there's all these groups being formed, but it's kind of a very like, you're not in our group, and you're a really bad person if you don't really 110% join our group, everything we believe in, and as a result, we're going to go and cancel you. That doesn't connect with community and belonging. That more connects with anger, anxiety, fear, which is not helpful. Not helpful for society and not helpful for the individual in the long run.
So I have to, as a curious podcast host, ask then, knowing that you're Jewish and we're on the topic of cancel culture, there have been some anti-Semitic comments coming from some certain celebrities, people that are pretty well known. I think they've been pretty canceled.
I'm wondering, by the way, I want to be mindful. Are we allowed to name them? You don't have to, but...
I think we're allowed to name them. I mean, the big one is Kanye, right? I think that everybody's got gotten a front seat for Kanye. I know Kyrie has had some comments. And so that's where it gets really interesting, because in identity politics, right, the idea is that there's all this intersectionality. We have all of these identities. I'm a white male. I'm a cis white gendered male. And for that reason, these are the advantages that I have. Of course, then you also have to factor in I'm a white cisgender male that I do have a chronic brain disorder. So how does that factor in? But what's interesting with like Kanye and Kyrie is that in some circles, again, we're just going into the conversation. So here we go. In some circles, parts of their identity are oppressor identities, and some of them are oppressed. For example, male is seen as an oppressor to female. I think they both identify as straight compared to a different sexuality, but they're black, so that's seen as oppressed. But then they've also had some anti-Semitic comments. So it starts to get complex quickly. From your perspective as a clinical psychologist, I mean, how do you unpack that? Is that a lead with compassion and have conversations? Is that just to cancel them and push them out of society? We've completely forgotten about the Me Too movement, by the way, so sprinkling that in there. But so, I mean, what is your perspective? I'm genuinely just curious.
You know, I would say, speaking to the kind of going what you were initially talking about, whether it was Kanye West or Kyrie Irving, who are both incredibly talented at what they do. I mean,
totally.
Kanye is a lyrical genius. His music is very amazing, and that doesn't really change. And Kyrie has insane handles and is very talented.
Yep.
What I'd say with Kanye West, I think I heard Trevor Noah talking about this, is Kanye West is clearly, he is a significant mental health issues, some of which are known with the bipolar diagnosis. And what I'd say is Trevor Noah was talking about, if someone is sick, I'm not going to go and give them a major microphone. And so what I think was the problem was, from a societal standpoint, was people were taking advantage of this.
Yes.
News hosts jumping in, everyone rushing to put it in. And because, well, that's what sells. That's not helpful. Now, I want to also be mindful, is just because you have whatever mental health issues you have does not mean, we should be forgiving of it when you're taking it to that level of extreme, such as what Kanye West did. Now, again,
it's a great point.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'd say is like, that's looking at from if we're looking at from a cancel culture, okay, like, again, what really went above and beyond? I think it's fairly safe to say Kanye went way above and beyond. So if that impacts his business, well, that makes sense. And I also think there's a reasonable concern from, for Jewish people, as far as, well, lo and behold, what he said and how people receive that message. You have seen an uptick in anti-Semitism, and that's as a result. And this is why, hey, listen, we really shouldn't just overlook it. And this is a significant thing, with someone like Kyrie Irving. I think Kyrie Irving, again, he is in a position of power that, again, similar to Kanye West, is very unique. Is something that, us ordinary people who don't make millions upon millions, don't have the greatest ball handling skills ever in the NBA. We don't have that same experience, but he has millions upon millions upon millions of followers. So I think, living in the uncertainty, you could post what you want to post, but at the same time, you need to be mindful about it. And likewise, I mean, this is someone who has made many controversial comments. And what I'd say was, when this was brought, what was problematic for Kyrie Irving was when this is brought to his attention, he kind of stuck his nose up and he kind of blamed the media instead, versus not taking his own responsibility. But again, I think about thinking about this from people who don't, who are not that level of celebrity. from a kind of like thinking of, being able to express thoughts and so forth, it's important that you're, raising questions, but you're not espousing, anti-Semitic views, racist views, and that's a much different beast. And so I want to be mindful, even while we're talking about them. Again, that is like a completely different experience. That for the lives of someone with OCD, they are taking this to such an extreme standpoint that maybe, for instance, they would be afraid of saying, "Hey, I'm a political centrist," because maybe you'll get canceled by saying that. That's taking it to like, what is, I would say, hey, it's important to be able to just, openly talk about those type of experiences and dealing with the uncertainty that may come with it in a healthy way.
You made a great point there at the end. So I really appreciate you talking about that if you're posing questions and you're coming from a place of curiosity, I think it's really hard for hate. Well, I guess hate and curiosity could exist at the same time. But I think it's probably a lot harder to do that. I'm not Jewish, so that, I guess, my feeling towards Kanye especially is like, he's definitely struggling with something. He needs professional assistance. And man, I wish somebody could get to him and sit down and understand, why do you have these feelings towards the Jewish community? Is there something that we can talk about and unpack to get you to have a different perspective? And that's almost how I feel with a lot of these movements and what I've appreciated. I mean, it's basically curiosity is what you've been talking about. And I think that that's such an important key word in this. Is just like, can we get to a point as a society where we get everybody on board because we've come from a place of curiosity and education and wanting to seek to understand, to then get people on their path? Because, yeah.
I was going to say and maybe some people have certain hateful beliefs and they can't change their perspective, and I would say then it's probably not in our interests. Like to go and, hey, for me to spend time, again, I don't think Yi is going to be speaking with me, but I would say for me to try to like convince him of, the importance of, his actions. I mean, if he has, I think they are very abhorrent, but like, if you have really, really hateful views, you're probably not that open for another perspective. And it's,
that's a good point.
It's not in my interest. It's not going to be, helpful. And I would say this is, I'm speaking this about this individually, but I would say this in general, because that's not going to be the kind of person who's going to have an open perspective when they're that extreme.
When it's that extreme. Yeah, that's a fair point. And to that, I feel that the extremes on both sides of the political aisle, if you will, are kind of what drive the narratives on both sides, because that's just, again, what sells. Extremism. Because when everyone's consuming from their phones and their TVs, you need that hook. You need that attention getter. So two people sitting down and having dialogue back and forth and agreeing on this, maybe not completely agreeing on that, that's not that sexy. We need people like yelling at each other and being riled up. So I do think that is a good point that you bring up. Extremism is what gets the attention.
Yeah, and I would say it's an unfortunate reality is things have become more of an echo chamber. So like if you go to the discussion section of the New York Times, for instance, and you're going to have everyone who's very strongly having they're the same perspective. And, it's that kind of that diversity of thinking is limited when we're continuing on that kind of one side is right, the other side is right, the other side is wrong. It's just not helpful.
So getting back to, I guess, more of an OCD lens, how does one with OCD navigate intrusive thoughts and cancel culture? How do you navigate that? What would you have somebody do in an ERP session? What does that look like?
Yeah. So, a biggest part of treatment, is obviously the psychoeducation. I want people first who have OCD to understand, first and foremost. So I'm going to kind of maybe try to give a whole snap of a snap of my treatment, and you can feel free to jump in and cut me off as needed. But what I would say is, so first and foremost, I'm always going to go with psychoeducation and really helping people understand that some of these thoughts that are very overwhelming, again, whether it's a sexually related intrusive thought. Let's say someone identifies as heterosexual and then they suddenly have a thought, oh my God, that
I'm
other
gay.
person,
That happened to me. And that was my first.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. That person, that guy over there has a great butt. Now, probably the reality is, first off, and that could be also reversed. That could be someone who identifies as gay. And I've even seen this as well with patients. Someone identifies as gay, and lo and behold, they have an intrusive thought. Oh, that's a very, very attractive woman. Oh my God. What if I'm actually heterosexual? And suddenly, it's very threatening. Now, what I will say is the reality from a psychoeducation standpoint is everyone has crazy, weird thoughts. I just happen to give that as an example, but the list could be endless. And that's the beauty for humanity, that we're thinking beings. And I would say, by extension, someone who doesn't have OCD, they have a thought, and what's that thought? But lo and behold, some other thought comes in, something else goes on, and it kind of goes away. Someone with OCD, that thought is very threatening. It's very threatening to who they are. Again, OCD has a tendency to attack what means so much to you. So now, lo and behold, oh my God, that thought can't be true. If it's true, I'll have to leave my wife, or, I'll have to leave my husband, and oh my God, nobody would accept me in my family, or I'd be a fraud. And lo and behold, because this thought is so threatening, and they're taking so much meaning to it, they're engaging in all of these behaviors, all of these compulsions, whether it may be now in their mind reviewing prior, again, just because we were mentioning sexual related obsessions, they may be reviewing ways of, this is 100% how I'm proving, that I may be heterosexual, or this is how I may be proving that I'm gay. Again, it's with this, I need to know with 100% certainty. Yes. And I'm going to do mental compulsions, things in my head to prove it, or I'm going to do certain behaviors, checking behaviors, researching, looking things on the internet. Again, with that intense perspective of these behaviors are going to fully allow me to be 110% in the know, which again, when we went back to the car accident, the driving, that is not how the world works, Nope.
Nope.
And it's about, so I really emphasize again within that, hey, let's take a look. And this is number one, this is your diagnosis, and this is how it's impacting you. And also, really emphasizing that a big part of the treatment is about embracing uncertainty, learning to accept, hey, whatever it is could happen. Probably very unlikely, but it could happen in some crazy world. People have existential obsessions. Maybe this isn't real. Maybe we're all living in a matrix. Again, I'm pretty confident that we're not living in a matrix. But who knows? Perhaps this. I saw that movie. Who knows?
Right. Again, we totally could be. Maybe we are. Maybe we're not.
We are. I'm confident. Even we're not. And even if we are, well, I'd say, okay, I still got to live my life. I got to pay my bills. But what I'd say, so when we've got that psychoeducation piece, again, really hammering the uncertainty piece. Well, now, I really want to. Really take a look at a deep dive of what is the person doing to minimize that fear? What are all the compulsive behaviors? What are things that they're not doing? What are things that family members or significant others may be doing, like accommodations to help reduce their fear? Because that essentially, if you think about it from like a sports analogy, that's like creating the playbook of understanding this is what OCD is doing, and this is actually what's maintaining your OCD. Again, yes, people may have a more of a genetic susceptibility, and there may be a lot of learned behaviors too. That's where you've got both models working, but that's what's essentially maintaining what's going on right now. Now that we've got that piece, now we've got a little bit of a guidebook for how you're going to beat OCD. So it's about now breaking those rules, breaking those compulsions. And again, the treatment is called exposure response prevention. So breaking those rules, well, that's part of the response prevention piece. Again, we may be doing them differently. We may be doing the opposite of what OCD says. So if OCD says, no, you are to never look at any guy again because that could prove that you're gay and that is unacceptable. Okay, we're going to want you to break that rule. You're going to be doing that more purposely. And likewise, obviously, if the rule, if it's however it's reversed, the same thing would apply. And what I'd say also is that's one piece, and then also it's these exposures where you're doing certain difficult tasks that OCD would prefer you not do, and doing them for extended periods of time where through a natural process, number one, I would say what often can happen is your fear will decrease over time. Like if you think about you have a scary roller coaster, you do it again and again and again and again and again and again and again, you eventually learn, the fear goes down. And I would say, but even more importantly, let's even just say for whatever reason your fear does not go down, you still learn, hey, this can be an uncomfortable situation and I can handle it. And that is my spiel. And Zach, thank you for not interrupting even too.
That was fantastic. And I'll tell you that a gay man saved my life because when I was going down the rabbit hole, I stumbled across a blog. I don't know his name. I can't remember it to this day, but I stumbled across a blog online because I was compulsively researching. How do you know you're straight? Can you just magically turn gay? Like it was like literally things like that. And I always say this just to be clear to the audience, like people need to embrace their sexuality. You need to be who you are. For me, I just always identified as a straight male. So all of a sudden, I'm just like, wait, what? Like, how has this happened? And I was dating my now wife, and I'm like, but I love my wife. Or like my girlfriend at this time. I'm like, I want that. Like, I'm confused. I don't want to be gay, but I'm confused as to why this is happening. So I was compulsively researching, and I stumbled across an article by a gay man who had OCD, and his biggest fear was being straight, and that he would have intrusive thoughts about being straight, and that it scared him and gave him anxiety. And to this day, I remember breaking down crying because I was like, oh my God, this is OCD. And that's what led me to find a therapist that specializes in ERP, and then going through the exact process of what you talked about, embracing the uncertainty. And that analogy of the roller coaster was amazing because that's what it is. I can actually remember my first time going on a roller coaster as a kid. I was pale white afterwards. I was so scared during that first time. And every time after, it just got easier and easier and easier. And while in OCD, seeking certainty is just going to keep you trapped in that cycle, I will say, and I'm glad that you touched on this, there's something so powerful about getting the reps that eventually leads to some form of, I'm not going to say certainty, but I will say clarity. I still to this day am not going to say I am 100% straight. I don't know for sure, but I have enough clarity to say, I'd probably put it at 99.9%. That's, I would feel pretty strong placing that wager. I don't know for sure, but I feel that I have enough clarity to say, and I've gotten enough reps with ERP that is, I just feel like I have clarity. But I do recognize that at the start, and this was the case for me, and I wonder what your thoughts are on this, I was so entangled in the OCD. I didn't know what was up and down. I was just confused and lost. So how does somebody start to get untangled?
You know, and that is really what's very, very interesting is, lo and behold, OCD pulls you away from what actually is going on and from whatever the original stressor is, where suddenly OCD traps you into this like rigid thinking, oh, am I this or am I that? When lo and behold, it may have been some other issue that actually is what got you stressed. And that's where it's really obviously important to disentangle from OCD's web. You know, what I would say is compulsions pile up. It is never enough. So that's kind of like, hey, you know, if you think about someone who has a just right fear and, you know, a just right obsessions, and lo and behold, they need to hit their door button a certain amount of times for their car, you know, with the clicker, or they need to check and make sure the door is locked a certain amount of times. It's usually never enough. And that's the big thing. If you're going to be playing by OCD's rules, it's going to be a long and arduous process. As you start to break the rules, you start to realize, hey, I can deal with this. I can handle this discomfort. I can handle the uncertainty that comes with it. And I'm all right. You know, I don't have 100% certainty of everything, but now all of a sudden, you know, I'm not a prisoner of OCD. OCD is that giant bully. And as you learn to break those rules, you start doing exposure work, OCD does not go away. You know, and I want to say is, while we're talking about OCD, the same would be true also for other clinical related issues. If someone sees me for depression and one of their treatment goals is, hey, listen, you know, I really want to work on this issue, Dr. Spiegel. And, you know, I want to know for 100% certainty, like, I'm never going to feel that way again. I'm never going to be sad. You know, maybe earlier on when I was like a very like rookie psychologist, I would have been like, okay, well, let's see what we can do together. Now, I would never do that. I would never suggest that to anyone. But right. Okay, we're going to work on activities, things that you can do that will give you meaning, you know, for if you're depressed, and things that will be very helpful for you and, you know, very supportive. And, you know, I can't give you that guarantee. You know, the reality is life hits you. Like, you know, you get illnesses, things come up. You may get depressed again. I can't guarantee that. However, you know, we could talk about things that would be helpful for you, things that will be helpful for you now, and things that will be helpful for you, even if such an issue were to happen. So you're not sucked in by the depression. And that's what I would say, like, you know, the same thing for someone with OCD is you're learning these new ways to respond, where the more you're able to do it, you can handle the discomfort that comes with it. And lo and behold, now you may still get like an intrusive thought, but OCD is it's a smaller thing, and you're able to look at the bigger picture, and you're able to live the life that you want to live, which is so important.
The depression example was amazing, because I hear that all the time, even from people with OCD too, that are like, I never like, Zach, like, how do I make it so that I don't like relapse again? How do I make it so that I never feel depression again? And first off, I so appreciate that you help people flex that muscle of living in uncertainty and accepting those areas of gray, because man, there is so much freedom in the area of gray once you settle into that place. But the big thing that you touched on is that toolbox. And for me, in my own journey with my OCD, I always say, tomorrow I could wake up and be severely depressed, extremely anxious. I could even be struggling with thoughts of suicide. And what gives me comfort when I put my head on my pillow at night is that I know I have a tool bag. I know I've got people like you that I can go see to do ERP. I know that I like to meditate. I exercise. I enjoy spending time with my wife and friends. I've got a couple hobbies. I've got this business that I absolutely love that I get to bring on guests like you.
And that you're very good at too.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So I've got all these different, I've just got so many things so many tools in my tool bag now that I'm like, it could happen. And I even hedge against it a little bit. And this, I wonder what your thoughts are. I do a little bit of agreeing with my OCD thoughts, but I'll even hedge. Let's say I have a fear about becoming depressed again. I'll say to my brain, yeah, you're going to become depressed again, because there are so many factors in life that can cause depression, like the passing away of a loved one. I love my wife to death. Statistically, there is a chance that her and I don't stay married forever. I plan on being married to her for as long as possible. If there's a chance that that doesn't happen, I'll be depressed. But I know that I'll have a tool bag. It'll hurt. And that's that tolerance that you were talking about. You start to be able to tolerate some of these uncomfortable emotions. I know that I'll be able to tolerate it long enough to tap into my tool bag to let that tool bag go to work and do what I know it can do. But I will say that at the start of my OCD journey, I didn't have that sample size of like, yes, I'm feeling pain right now, but if I go through this process, it does get better. That's where I think it can trip people up.
Yeah, and it's very hard when you're really struggling with something, especially something like OCD, which is nonstop chatter in your brain, in your head. So you're literally getting no privacy. It's not just like, having an annoying neighbor and, you're not at home, or you could like close the blinds. Like you literally can't close the blinds. You can't escape. That it's very hard when you're starting, even when you're starting treatment to be like, yep, all this stuff is going on, and I can see that there's a path forward. It's really hard when you're really struggling, when you're in the midst of the beginning of treatment. You don't have any prior like kind of significant success against OCD, in part because you've never really necessarily had the appropriate treatment. Right. That it's hard to see a path forward. And, the reality is, as, you get the right treatment, you embrace the uncertainty, you start doing some of this hard work, suddenly that light starts to open up. You may still be struggling, but you can see a path forward, like, hey, I can live the life that I want to live. OCD, was Mike Tyson before. Now it's just this like little kid who's hitting around again. So we're not saying that like OCD is going to disappear completely, but OCD is not going to be Mike Tyson knocking you out constantly.
Yes, which is what it felt like. I was like, I'm in the ring with Mike Tyson on endless rounds at the start. What are in addition to embracing uncertainty, what are some other mentalities that people should adopt at the start of their journey, or wherever they're at in their OCD journey, that you've seen be helpful for your patients?
It's so I work with both kids and adults. I mean, I see, I see very much also like a large college population. I see younger kids. I mean, so my work with OCD spans with kids and adults. And something that I definitely do with younger kids, and which I would say is actually can be very applicable for adults too, is I use this concept called a worry monster. And I'm not sure if this is something that you did in your treatment, but essentially this is a way of we're going to like externalize OCD from you. Doesn't mean, by the way, OCD is a part of your experience, but we're not saying OCD defines you completely. So in that vein, now we're going to figure out from this worry monster. And again, when I use the term worry monster, like it's essentially, we're like going to give OCD a name. So if you want to call it OCD, that's totally cool. However, if you want to call OCD, something silly like, stupid pants, or, I'm sure we could come up with more creative names, but probably not like appropriate completely at a podcast, something that's like humorous or something that they don't like. Again, not something that's like going to be fear-based. I would say, let's come up with a name for OCD. Let's make this more of like a game, something that you're going to get better at, and you're going to also make a little bit fun in the process. So we're going to now come up, what are a list of all the rules that OCD or, dumb pants, or again, I've had, I love that. I have a kid who calls their OCD. All sorts of crazy names for OCD. Whatever we're going to do, Voldemort, whatever it is.
Yeah.
We're going to come up with a list
That's
of
funny.
all the compulsions, and we're going to learn to break the rules. And as you break the rules, you're seeing OCD now more as like a challenge. Like, hey, let me give Voldemort a little run for their money, and really start breaking more and more of the rules. And now it's becoming less of an issue. And I want to say, is this again something that can be applied for adults too? When I work with adults, I'm not going to say, hey, let's call I'm not going to necessarily use the term a worry monster, but I'll ask them casually, do you want to give OCD a name? Like, let's make this a little bit fun as you break the rules. So viewing in that sense, OCD more as like a challenge, and as a challenge and something that you can in fact overcome. And I feel strongly about this, and I want you to feel strongly about this, because you have overcome a lot of difficulties in your life in other ways, and there's no reason that you can't for this as well.
I made my OCD a character too. So I look at him as just this separate guy. I call him an annoying Instagram influencer that has nothing valuable to say, but keeps squawking on social media to try to get my attention. So he's separate from me. Yeah, he's a troll. He's a troll. He's going to do his thing. He can sit there and run and squawk and jump up and down and do everything he can to get my attention. And honestly, it's just, he's an annoying Instagram influencer. So I have found making my OCD a separate character to be super beneficial. 2 more questions for you. What are some of the rules that people need to break in the process of overcoming OCD? What are some of those rules?
I mean, so if I were to use the rules and speaking about them broadly, rules can be, and rules are, I'm essentially referring to compulsions, compulsive behaviors. So rules could be checking behaviors. And when I say checking, that could mean like, I need to check and make sure the door was locked. I mean, that's a more obvious one. Or maybe I need to check and make sure that paper was there. Or maybe I need to check and make sure I didn't send that message. And actually, maybe I did. Now I'm going to recheck it. I'm going to check it again, because that's what OCD needs to know with that 100% certainty, and it's going to just attack at it. So it'd be like a checking compulsion. I mean, another common one is reassurance seeking. Let me keep asking this question again, because maybe I didn't ask it the right way, or maybe there's that, that 1% chance that, that I'm that one exception. It could be ordering, needing to order things again and again. There's accounting compulsions. People will need to do things again in their head as far as like accounting a certain way and so forth. It's a good question you're asking me, like recall the common compulsions. I would say people often engage in mental compulsions. And this is where it can be a little bit more harder to see, because if we're talking, I'm not necessarily able to get a sense on what's going on in your head, but from a mental compulsion, people may be trying to answer whatever is causing the doubt, and they're doing it repeatedly again and again. There's nothing that's enough they need to know in that black and white thinking. Researching, these are very common compulsive behaviors. Essentially, just, I would say it's either things that people are generally just doing again and again and again to get rid of the distressing thought, the distressing feeling. Those are common compulsions. When I'm talking about rules, we'll take those categories and we'll even like look at it from a more nuanced level. Let's actually look at the specific behaviors you're doing. So if you have some intense fear of contamination, well, now you wash your clothes repeatedly, you tell your significant other that they have to leave their shoes out of the home. And if there was the idea that maybe the shoe went inside the home, well, now you have to a behavior, maybe you have to wash the carpet a few different times. You have to put it in the laundry machine then. That's another behavior. So we were going to look at more from the rules as far as behaviors that people are doing as a result of the OCD. And also maybe things that they're avoiding too. If they're taking an approach, well, now I'm just never going to do X, Y, and Z, I'd say that is a rule. That's an OCD related rule. That's a clear compulsion.
An example for me, I'm not going to go to the gym anymore because I don't want to see guys in in with shirts on that are cut off at the sleeve because I don't want to be triggered by seeing a guy lifting a weight and having a thought, oh, wow, he's strong, or like, oh, wow, that's attractive. That would be one for me. So that would be a rule that I would break and be like, no, OCD. We're going to the gym and we're working out and we're accepting and tolerating uncertainty around any and all thoughts that you end up having.
Yeah. And you know, within this piece, you know, it's important to keep in mind that that was really great what you did in your treatment is you don't try to like break all of the rules all at once. That's setting yourself up for a bit of a failure. I mean, so I've done a marathon before, and I didn't just go out and decide one day, you know, I've ran like 3 miles and I can totally do it on the treadmill. Let's just go and sign up for the Philadelphia Marathon tomorrow, and you know, let's go run the marathon. You know, you gotta prepare yourself. You know, think about this as like an ongoing thing that you have to do as part of your self-care, just and honestly part of living.
Yes.
So you know, it's about maybe breaking some of the rules. You're not going to necessarily like go and just break all of it at once, but now obviously if you're breaking one compulsion, but now you're replacing it with a different one, well, that's going to be problematic. But that's like, you know, when you're working with a specialist and so forth, they can, someone who really knows how to treat OCD, really knows how to use exposure response prevention. You're going to be getting someone who's going to be more attuned to kind of helping you in that process.
Okay. That makes sense. Yeah. Building out that hierarchy and sort of chipping away at it. And I think the marathon example is perfect. So I'm looking at the clock here and realizing that I have to jump here in a second. So let me ask you this. What is one piece of advice that you would give someone who is right at the start of their OCD journey?
I'll try to boil it down to you are not alone. And you've got this. You've done this in other ways in your life where you've done difficult things. You can do this for OCD too.
That's amazing. I love that. You're not alone, y'all, and you can do this. You got this. To Dr. Spiegel's point, you've been there before. You've done it in other capacities. I did it in skiing this weekend. I am terrified of skiing. I've been 6 times now, and the 6th time, it's like everything clicked. And I habituated and the fear went away, and I was cruising down the slope. So it was actually fun for the first time since starting skiing. Yeah. So you can do hard things. To Jenna's podcast, I know that's one of our mutual connections. But Dr. Spiegel, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. Thank you so much for just sharing your insights and expertise with my audience.
Thank you. I really had a nice time.